It's too difficult to understand a foreign language. Everyone speaks so fast. Why do they speak so fast? Well, I mean, it's their language and that's just how it is. But do they really speak all that fast? Let's find out. Hi, my name's Juliet and I'm currently in the very early stages of learning Italian. When I first started watching Italian videos on YouTube, I could barely understand what was going on, even though many Italian videos on YouTube are actually spoken in fairly slow language, especially the ones that are teaching you Italian. It simply sounded like garbled words because my brain couldn't keep up. However, I didn't give up. I kept watching, and now, you know what? Only 3 months later, most of those channels are fairly easy to understand, even ones that aren't specifically aimed at language learning. If you've been following along with my journey, you'll know that a couple of weeks ago I started listening to Italian radio. Even after a couple of days, I could understand more, but now I can understand substantially more. For example, on Tuesday, I heard a piece on the Italian news about a boy in England discovering a really old fossilised tooth whilst digging in his garden. At least, that's what I thought I heard. This wasn't something that I'd heard on our news over here. But that didn't surprise me because quite often an American friend of mine tells me things that have happened in this country that I know nothing about. But I was intrigued to find out whether I'd got it right. So I went on a search. And I found this piece on the BBC News website. I'm not going to deny, it was quite pleasing to find that I had understood the story reasonably well. Obviously, it wasn't big enough for prime time on our news. On radio, they tend to speak a lot faster than most YouTube videos. So how did I manage to understand this? Well, partly because it used some language that I have recently learnt about body parts, and that kind of clicked with my brain. But mostly it's because on radio you will actually hear quite a lot of repeated vocabulary, especially when we're talking about news. For example, in the news and on discussion programmes, there's a huge amount currently about a certain virus. It doesn't take long for that vocabulary to get ingrained, but I do have a problem keeping up with all the numbers they're saying about how many people have the vaccine, how many people have the disease, this statistic, that statistic, but hopefully that will come fairly soon. Another thing I can now recognise is when they start talking about the weather. To start with, I didn't even realise they were talking about the weather. So obviously, familiarity with the language is a big part of the issue, or two parts. First, you have to understand the individual words, then you have to understand them in a complete sentence. Scrub that. 3 parts. Then you have to understand them in context. It's not easy. You're going to have to work hard to understand. But I seem to have digressed rather a lot. Let's get back to what you came here for. Is Italian really spoken faster than English? The most recent study available on the internet seems to be this one, posted at sciencemag.org on 4th of September 2019. This study took 17 language and 170 participants and studied how they spoke specific standard texts. They measured the speed in numbers of syllables per second and in how much information was imparted in those syllables. If you want to read the whole thing, because I've simplified that down greatly, I'll leave a link in the description. So yes, it turns out that some languages can say more in fewer syllables. That's probably not a big surprise to language learners. But I think it's the speed of those syllables that makes a language sound brain-paralysingly fast. Tiny fractions of a difference can have a huge impact on comprehension. So, fastest at the top, here's a few of those languages with their rankings. You can see Italian is higher on the syllables per second scale than English. However, it's not that simple. Is it ever? It turns out that English provides more information per syllable, as do many of the languages further down the list. So when you put that together with the speed of the syllables, you end up with pretty much the same amount of information being given in the same length of time. So no one language is that much different in speed to another. Of course, among populations there are huge variations in how fast people speak. Even in your own language, you probably know people who speak far too fast to be easily understood, or with an accent that's not easy to understand. That's a whole other ball game. So what's my solution to understanding a language that sounds faster than my own? I guess just listening, and listening, and listening. Of course, after that comes being able to have a conversation with someone. Let's just brush that to the side for the moment. See you again soon.